Don't go out past midnight. Posted by user disgarbage on R Paranormal. I just read a story on here that sparked a memory of my own odd experience. I had just left my boyfriend's, now husband's, house after staying there all night. It was a typical afternoon of studying and video games. I felt a little bit groggy getting out to my car because I had passed out and took a nap for about an hour. It was extremely cold, and I remember that feeling waking me up once I got into my car. I pulled out of his driveway and made my way down the back road that eventually led to a main intersection. It was completely quiet and still, with absolutely no one else on the road. I was kind of used to this because I worked graves at a nursing home full-time and by myself. I remember glancing down at the clock to see it read 2:30 a.m. As I reach the intersection and flip my signal on to turn left, the light remains red and I sit there for a minute, waiting for it to change. Across the road, there is a massive cemetery that sits atop a hill. I blankly stared at it, wondering if any residents I've worked with rest there. Eventually, the light turns green, and I make my way down the long stretch of road. The speed limit is now 50 miles per hour all the way down this hill, and the cemetery covers half of that distance. I was shivering because my car's heater hardly worked, and my teeth chatter uncontrollably when I'm freezing. I was zoned the hell out until I reached the bottom of the hill. The road is illuminated with lights, so I was pretty darn sure I didn't see anything ahead while making my way down this hill. As I pull up to the light at the bottom, I see something materialize out of thin air. It was a woman. She was standing behind a white van that was down a ditch on the side of the road with its red lights on. I remember tapping my brakes and feeling as if time slowed down. My heart was pumping adrenaline throughout my body so fast my fingers burned and all the way up to my chest. She was screaming, with wide-open, tear-filled eyes. She was mouthing something to me, but it didn't register. I realized she was pointing in the direction of the cemetery. I was so confused because it honestly looked to me as if she was screaming her heart out, but I couldn't hear a thing. A short Hispanic woman with her hair back in a ponytail, blue jeans, and no shoes. I reached the stoplight, and I instantly swung back around to catch a second look. There was absolutely nothing. I remember my hands not being able to steady themselves as I reached for the steering wheel. I could hardly catch my breath. The feeling I got when I looked into her eyes was complete panic and terror. The rest of the ride home was quiet. I couldn't sleep that night, and I can still see her face clear as day. Just makes me wonder why she wanted to show herself to me, and if there was something I could have done to help.
The most paranormal moment in my life so far. Posted in our Ghost Stories by Nefferito. I wrote this last year, 2019, to send to the Mr. Nightmare YouTube channel. That's why it's super formal. But he never posted the story, so I guess I'll share it here. I changed the names of my friends and cousin, not that that matters. It's all true, but I left out the part about us getting followed on the way back. Anyway, here you go. There's a place in Kaysville, Utah, called Kay's Cross. I'll let you research the full history of the place, but basically a guy started a cult claiming he was Jesus. He got murdered for some reason, and someone made a stone cross for him in his honor. A lot of evil things happened here, so someone blew up the cross. No one knows who it was to this day. These days it's owned by some family that keeps it very private and doesn't like trespassers. The place was even on Ghost Adventures. Anyway, I've been there a total of 3 times. 4 if you count the time I got caught about to trespass. But the only time something really happened is the first and third times I went there. The first time I was with 2 of my friends, Mike and Gary. We've always liked to ghost hunt, and we've gone to a cabin in the woods that was apparently owned by Ted Bundy. Anyway, it was June, and we just watched that Ghost Adventures episode and thought it would be easy to sneak into the property to see the cross for ourselves. We drove 20 minutes and finally arrived. It's literally the sketchiest place on earth. We cut through the little orchard near the property and found a trail that we thought led to the cross. This is when stuff started going down. I heard a woman faintly yell my name. It was clear as day and seemed to be coming from the cross. Whatever, I thought. Must be some kids playing games, and my imagination made it sound like my name. My friend Gary then says, "Dude, that was your name." Mike didn't hear it, so we ignored it and kept walking. We eventually got to this well that had satanic symbols painted on it. It looked pretty cool until we looked down the well. There, we saw a very large black duffel bag filled with something. "Probably a body bag," Mike joked. We all nervously laughed, but we were all kind of freaking out a little bit. We walked further down the path. As soon as the remains of the cross came into view, Mike had the worst panic attack I've ever seen anyone ever have. Mike's a tough guy, and he's usually really chill, so this was freaky to see happen. He kept wanting to leave, but me and Gary kept going. We got to the cross and stopped to look around. We started hearing whispers coming from all around us. We could see very faint images of a tall, black, shadowy figure all around us. We immediately booked it back the way we came. More shadow figures were standing in the woods all the way down the trail. It felt like they were laughing at us as we ran in fear. Eventually, we got back to the car and drove all the way home without saying a word. Now, fast forward to last week. My cousin Seth was in town from Colorado, and he heard the story that I just told you. He wanted me to take him, so I drove him up there. When we got there, I saw Mike had texted me saying he and Gary wanted to hang out. I told him what we were doing, and they said they'd be there in 30 minutes. When they finally got there, we planned how we should get in. We had heard about a back entrance to get to the cross, so we wanted to try that. We drove around and finally got to the back entrance. We had to jump a wire fence and a broken barbed wire fence to get there. The area was basically a big hill with dry, long grass. We followed the small path up the hill. We looked at the map on our phone and decided that the fastest way was to cut through a thick group of trees. That was where a stream used to be. It was lower than the hill, so getting down there was a little bit tricky. We walked into the tree and slowly worked our way through him. Gary was in the front, then me, then Seth, then Mike. We were almost out of the trees when we heard footsteps off to the left of us. We stopped to listen. About 10 feet away, we heard 2 footsteps. Then the loudest snap ever, like someone broke a huge tree branch. "What was that?" Seth asked. We all turned around and walked ourselves back up the hill. We gathered ourselves and decided to take the trail along the trees. As we were walking, Seth and Mike said they kept seeing someone duck into the tall grass when they looked back. Someone was following us. We kept walking, trying to stay aware of our surroundings. We were almost past the tree when we heard footsteps again. We looked into the tree, and this time turned out the flashlights on our phones. We could see pretty far into the trees, but we saw no one. We heard more footsteps and decided that that was enough. We ran back to the fence, hopped them, and got into the car. I don't know what was there those days in the trees, and I don't know what keeps making me want to go back, but I do plan to go there again someday. Edit. Oh yeah, I forgot, one of the weird occurrences happened the first time I went there. In the Ghost Adventures episode, they talk about dogmen, right? Well, like 5 minutes after I heard my name called as we were getting closer to the cross, we heard barking that sounded very close to us. At first we thought they were guard dogs, but every one of the gates on the property and the properties near it were wide open, and all the fences were not fences that could keep dogs inside. The barking stopped after we noticed the gates were open. I'm not saying those were the dogmen that they mentioned, but it was odd.
Where her eye should have been, there was nothing. Posted by user pocketplantofficial to r/paranormal. I grew up in a provincial town somewhere north of the Philippines. Back in the mid-90s, my mom had an instrumental job of helping establish schools in poorer provincial areas of the country. This was during the early days of cell phones, and a lot of areas didn't even have electricity, much less telephones, so getting contacts wasn't as simple as it is today. They needed people to actually travel from one town to another to bridge the gaps. My dad also had a farm 30 minutes to an hour away, so they'd usually take the opportunity to check on it during one of these business trips. The provincial roads they had to traverse were dark and dimly lit with sharp turns, and stories of collisions and accidents taking place at the dead of night were not uncommon. One of the most infamous sites in the region was a bridge in a town I'm not going to specify that allegedly collapsed and been rebuilt after a fully loaded bus was trying to pass a few decades ago. There'd been myths of witnessing bloody and bruised people looking into vehicles of passerby, but I personally never saw anything the many times I passed through that bridge. Now, getting to the title of this post. My parents told me the story. So, In one of their trips, my mom had 2 of her co-workers along. They'd finished the business trip and were on their way back home, and about 1 a.m., they were still up and chatting about random things, trying to keep my dad on the wheel awake. They were nearing the bridge when from afar, they could see what looked to be a woman with frizzy hair and a ripped and tattered rags that looked like it had been once beautiful white dress, standing on the side of the bridge and looking off into the distance. My dad described her skirt as torn and flaring in the wind. One of my mom's co-workers said,
"Wait, is that a person?"
wondering what a woman would be doing there in the middle of the night. This person might have intended to jump, and this might have been a cry of help. As they got closer, my dad slowed down the car to see what was up with this woman, and when they were next to her, she suddenly turned around, looked right at them, and gave them a smile. Her teeth were white, and my dad said from the tip of her nose, the upper part of her face was just nothing. I asked my dad to clarify, suggested that maybe her hair was obscuring the top of her face so they couldn't see her eyes, but he and my mom swear they know what they saw. There was just a black, empty void where the rest of that woman's face should have been. Everyone in the car was freaking out at this point, and my dad just hit it and didn't stop until they got to the next town. After everyone had calmed down a bit, my mom's co-worker suggested they started praying, so they did. They prayed they'd be safe that night and not encounter anything else. Thankfully, they all got home safely that night, but since that day, my mom's co-workers have been reluctant to tag along on these road trips. Even today, whenever I ask my dad to tell me the story again, he's still visibly shaken and getting goosebumps. Over the years, I've heard a couple of road trip stories from friends, and if you ever talk to anyone who's been in these trips, chances are they have a story to tell. I have a few more of these, including ones I've seen personally taking place in other towns, but I'll leave those for some other time. Thank you all for watching. If you want to find the original stories or the voice actors that read them, the links are in the description down below. If you like this sort of content, we will be posting Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. All of this is being done for free and by a small independent team, so be sure to show some love. I hope you all stay creepy, stay safe, and have a gay day.